Gavin Syme here, and today I'm excited because we're going to do a video that I've kind of wanted to revisit now for a while. A few years ago, I did a comparison of Lightroom versus Capture One, and I've done a few of those videos because it's a big topic. Now, we have a lot of great tools. On the raw side, we have things like Lightroom, like Capture One. Some people are using All-in-One or alternative tools, but I would say Lightroom and Capture One are the biggest. My conclusion right here is that Lightroom has better AI tools. Lightroom is a bit more intuitive to learn. The other thing to consider is price. Capture One is more expensive. Now, I love that you can buy a single license or you can buy an annual subscription, but I love that you can buy a single license on Capture One. The features don't change that quick on these. That's why they want you to subscribe to cloud. It's because they know they're not radically changing. So you might buy Capture One 22 and use it for 2 or 3 years before you buy an upgrade. But Capture One is selling for like $300. Whereas Lightroom with Photoshop is what? 10 bucks a month? $120. Capture One's going to cost you about $300 to buy and about $200 a year from now if you want to upgrade to the latest version. So the cost of ownership in Capture One is higher. Again, doesn't make it bad. A lot of us just do not want the cloud model and we're going to go for it regardless. Capture One still sells a single license, and props to them for that. Usability, Lightroom, I think, has it a little bit. Lightroom definitely has more with AI tools. Lightroom definitely has more with the tools that we can save into a preset. Capture One has a bit of an edge with levels, with its color editor. Capture One has a bit of an edge with its layers. Even though the AI and the masking is better in Lightroom, what you can do on a layer, the amount of tools, the way you can apply most of the developed tools in Capture One to any layer and therefore stack effects more than you can in Lightroom. We just have these tools right here to edit our masks, our gradients, our brushes, right? And you can do a lot with these, but it's not the same as Capture One, where if you go in and you add a layer, you still have not all, but almost all of the tools. It's a whole suite of developed tools that you can use within a masked layer in Capture One. That's an advantage. So there's points here. For me, I'm going to keep using Lightroom as my daily driver because I feel like I'm, generally speaking, can get great results faster. And the AI tools that Adobe's introduced in the latest versions of Lightroom are really getting pretty amazing. The AI masking, the ability to separate the portrait from the subject from the background and then quickly adjust sliders to bring down our sky. So again, Lightroom version, Capture One version of the same image. Lightroom version of the same image. The AI tools are better in Lightroom. The big one that the Fuji users argue is, oh, there's worms in Lightroom. Guys, I showed you examples. There's very little difference. So I have no fear as a photographer who's been doing this for 20 years, who shot Canon, who has Sony, who shoots Fuji. When I shoot a portrait on the Fuji, or a landscape on the Fuji, or a street shot on the Fuji, I don't think in my mind, oh, I better edit this in Capture One because I'll get a better result. I used to because there's so much people that say that, and then I started doing comparisons on these latest versions and realized there's really not that much difference. So I might do a breakout video on this. The bottom line here is the results in both are great. You're not wrong choosing either one of these. It's great that we have competition. Whether you choose Lightroom or Capture One, you're probably going to be happy. So I have here the latest versions of Lightroom 2022 and Capture One 2022. And I've been working a lot with these this week because I've been making the Natural HDR4 style pack for Capture One. So it already exists for Lightroom, for Camera Raw. I launched that on Black Friday, but I just finished building out that pack in Capture One. And I want to make a real honest, personal opinion. Yes, it's a personal opinion, but I'm not a fanboy of Adobe. In fact, I love that Capture One is pushing it. I love that there's other tools out there because I don't love the cloud model. What should you be using? What's going to work best for you? So let's not waste time. Let's actually jump in. I'm going to switch straight over here. I'm actually in Lightroom right now. I've been working with all kinds of images for natural HDR. And so that's kind of the zone I've been in. And let's actually come in here first and just start looking at a couple of different images. Let me go to this one, and I want to show you what's happening in this image. Here's the raw file in Lightroom for this image, okay? here is the finished natural HDR. This is 2 or 3 clicks, right? I applied HDR Earthscape, and then you can see, if you look up here, that I've applied a couple of masks, most importantly, the AI masks that I've been able to create in Natural HDR version 4 using the new AI tools. And you can see that it's really bringing this sky back. Let's go to the same image in Capture One 22. And I'm actually going to go up here. You can see I'm in the Capture One interface. I find the Capture One interface to be a little more clunky. I'm working in one screen mode right now for the sake of recording this. I do like that Capture One, we can drag the panels out and around and all that. So I can actually put the panels over here. And when I'm working and actually using Capture One, I tend to have a bunch of panels on my second screen, like curves and stuff like that. And then I'm over here editing the image. And with that, I do enjoy the interface pretty well. In one screen mode, we're always up here switching for every little thing. Whereas in Lightroom, I find it, to me, to be a little more intuitive, and I know that that's kind of a personal preference, but we switch between color and tone and detail and all that. Styles and presets right up here, and I'm gonna apply that same HDR landscape look, okay? And so you can see here's Capture One, and here's Lightroom. And this is the same raw file. Let's look what happens if I turn the masks off. You can see they're actually, it's amazing how much difference it makes when you turn those masks off. You can see the process is almost identical, the dynamic range. I will say for Capture One that if we go here to the tone tools, the high dynamic range tools in Capture One, particularly in the latest, most recent versions, the highlight and shadow, black recovery, white recovery, they're actually really good. And I can actually pull this sky back more and get more control here. I find that the highlight lift and the shadow lift, you can overdo it very easy in Capture One because it is very, very powerful. So I can pull my highlights back a little bit more and get a little bit closer. This, by the way, is a Sony A7R2 file. And I can get a little bit closer. This is ISO 400, 23 millimeters. Okay, so nothing crazy with noise. Let's zoom in and just see some details here between these two. Okay, so I'm gonna go into develop mode. Oh, sorry, I'm in the masks panel. That's why it's not responding. Let's zoom in right into here. Kind of do a one-to-one look. Okay, we're in Capture One again. I'm going to keep telling you in lieu of if I don't have text over the top of this to make sure. But you can also see the Capture One icon there up in the corner. Here's Capture One. Here's Lightroom. I feel like in this particular image, I've sharpened a little bit more in Lightroom, which we can, of course, do in Capture One. Let's actually look. No, I haven't sharpened that much. It's just the default sharpening. But what I think we're actually seeing, let's go to the detail panel in Capture One. Capture One by default puts, in my opinion, in my experience, more noise reduction. If I turn this noise reduction down, you're going to see this sharpen up if I turn it down to 0. In this image, that's not a problem because it's not a high noise image. So I can turn my sharpening up a little bit and my noise reduction down. And let's be honest, when we're looking at these are very, very similar. Now, I will say when I'm making presets, and I actually just finished a training video for Capture One to go along with the training video for Lightroom for specific to these natural HDR presets that I was working with. So if you guys are interested in that, you can check out those videos and see how I'm getting so much dynamic range out of a single file. But in practice, even though there's slight differences because I deal with this a lot. Capture One reads files, a Canon file, a Sony file, a Fuji file. It shows them. Even if I reset and it's at 0, that file is going to look a little bit different in Capture One than it is in Lightroom, just due to the nature of how it's interpreting the raw files. So what are the differences in practice? One of my big complaints, and I know this might seem silly, but if we go over here to Capture One and go to the folders, I can right click now, okay? And I can say, let's go to my folders and take this media catalog folder and synchronize it. And this is a big deal. And one of the reasons that I actually didn't use Capture One for a lot of my workflow stuff is because this was so inefficient. Because I shoot and I copy my images from an SD card or from the camera into my folder structure that I use to keep myself organized for projects. And so now we can include subfolders. And I know this seems obvious, but for years and years we couldn't include subfolders. This may have came out last year And I haven't done a comparison side by side of these in a while. So I don't know that this is new to version 22, but we can include subfolders, or we can only include previously added subfolders. And this is really good. It does seem, honestly, a little buggy. And I'm assuming that they will fix that up. For me, Lightroom's still my primary editor because I just like the way it functions in terms of organization and stuff better. I find it a little more intuitive and fluid. But I use Capture One a lot because I make this channel. I'm making style packs for Capture One. Okay, so if we look here and I put something like HDR Waterscape on here, right? You can see it's doing all these channels. And always, I love presets and native tools because we can see what's actually happening in our image. It's not like a flattened layer like a plugin creates, and we can just go in here and you can customize this yourself. So I can say, hey, I want to go and dial back my green saturation even more, right? But in Lightroom, we pretty much have these sliders. We have hue, saturation, luminance, and that's great. But we're kind of limited to that. In practice, it's not that limiting. I have to say pretty much any edit I want to do, I'm able to do just fine with this, no problem. Okay, and that's the practical reality of it. In practice, Lightroom, you tend to get there quicker, I think, if you're tinkering. Okay, if I go to Capture One and take this same image and then put the same HDR Waterscape preset on it, and then I go over here to the tools, you can see I have a color editor in Capture One that's on a different level, right? You start with the basic, which is very similar, but then you come in here and you can have an eyedropper, so you can make your own custom color to this list and then control the hue, saturation, and lightness of it. Or I can say, hey, give me these greens, for example. But what you have here is you have the wheel up here. So I can not only control the smoothness, which is basically the feather of this. Notice how it's feathering the edge in and out as I click this, and then control my saturation, my lightness, right? Let's say I want to darken up my greens. I can tell Capture One, I want this to be greens. Here's what I see as greens today, right? And so I can change what's being affected by controlling what is green, what is yellow. And this is a very powerful tool because I can expand this on either side and move it around. This little dot in the middle, by the way, is just changing what the color shows up in the palette here as the representation of that color. I can add as many of those as I want. Another tool that we have in Capture One, we have levels. And in Lightroom, we don't have levels. So does it mean you can't get the look you want? No, in practice, not at all. I can edit, and I do edit because I'm making styles in Capture One and presets in Lightroom and working with the same things and testing on different images to try and get consistently across my products. And I can usually get very, very close. So I can come in to here and I can say, let's tweak our shadow left, our high dynamic range, our highlight. Let's play with our clarity. I can do all this stuff, right? But I have levels here as well as the curve. So I can tweak the curve, lift it, control my highlight, roll off, all that kind of stuff. But then I might apply that to an image and say, oh, well, I want to control just the blacks, right? I want to punch a little bit in those black contrasts or in my midtones or in my highlights. And it's cool to have that extra added level. What's really happening is Capture One has some more tools, but let's go back to this image, right? Because what did I show you in Lightroom? Let's go to this image in Lightroom and turn on the masks again. Because these masking is really powerful because we can use it like a neutral density, a gradient neutral density filter. We can darken our skies, things like that. So if I come in here and I turn on the masking on this, I've done a huge amount to bring in this sky and just do an incredible amount of dynamic range on a single file, which I love doing because working with dynamic range on single files gives you more natural results, generally speaking. I rarely need to bracket and merge. I'm usually going for a natural HDR look, okay? So this is beautiful. I think this works great. I'm gonna go to another image and I'm gonna go back to my snapshots that I've saved. Raw image, pretty flat, but there's a lot to work with here, a lot in this. So I'm gonna go here and I could do all this manually, but I'm just gonna show you guys how quick this can be to edit this image. I'm gonna do HDR Oceanscape to really bring in my richness in that foreground. I'm gonna go down here and do the mod. I'm gonna click the super color mod to bring some more light. The only thing we're lacking now is the sky. And so I'm doing all this with just 3 presets. Now I'm going down here to XAI Sunset Skies, okay? And this is using the AI tool. Why did nothing change? Because I need to go over here to the mask tool, and you can see that the mask is there, but it says update. It's got the exclamation mark. I need to update it. I'm going to click update. It's going to find the sky, and then it's going to apply the settings that I've applied. Okay, that was like 4 clicks, guys. And we went from this starting point right here to this single raw file. Now let's try and do that same thing in Capture One. Let's go and apply a preset, right? So I'm going to do the Oceanscape preset and the Supercolor preset. It's looking pretty good. And Capture One does have really good shadow and highlight recovery, so I could even pull it back a little more and it looks good. But I don't have those AI masks. In fact, I can't even build a mask into a preset in Capture One, which is a favor in favor of Lightroom. And what I can do, though, is I can apply a mask, a traditional mask, right? Drag it, and then I can say, hey, let's do some highlight recovery here. Let's boost the saturation, and let's tweak with the color a little bit, make it a little warm maybe. We can do whatever we want to this, right? And I can control this, clarity, all these things that I might want to do to this, all right? And so there we have a pretty good looking sky, and I can tweak the colors and work with it a little bit. So we're here, but it's not this AI auto mask that's automatically separated. Yes, I could go in here and I could use Luma values. I could use the Luma separation to actually right click on this and say, let's use a Luma range. And that would allow me to do limit this mask based on Luma range, similar to what we can do in Lightroom. Again, very good tools. So there's nothing here, right? I'm a little more intense on my edit. Maybe some of you think it's too intense, but I could go in and edit this mask. I could turn my saturation down a little bit, but here's my Lightroom edit, and here is my Capture One edit. Both of them are very good edit. Arguably, Capture One is actually pulling more dynamic range out of this really bright point in the sky. So that is really good. I think we're getting a really good pull out of that. And I think that's great. Both of them are working well. But those new AI masks, what we can do with those new AI masks is pretty incredible. Look at this image here. Let's look at our raw file here. Here's what we started with, right? Here's what we ended with. And what did I have to use? All I did was use the Dynaportrait preset and the AI skies, which here, right? And then we in the portrait preset, we have subject and background separation. So I'm able to enhance the sky, I'm able to enhance the subject, and do all of this. If I go to Capture One, now this is a lot harder because I can go in and I can get a good dynamic range. I can get a look like this. Let's do natural blues on this. And let's go over here and darken the exposure down. And then we can do highlight. But see what happens? Look what's happening when I do a similar process to this in Capture One. I'm just making a gray sky. I can't get this amazing blue sky that I effectively was able to paint in using Lightroom in Capture One without doing a lot of mask, because I can't just drop a gradient on this one. I could do a mask like this, right? And then I could limit it by using a Luma range. Okay, so I could go like this. Let's display the mask. Let's see if we can get it to select. But see what's happening? It's not the same level of precision. I might be able to get close here though. Let's do that. Now we've got a Luma range separation. Now I'm going to pull back the exposure, but no, it's affecting her face. I can put some blue in this sky, but it's affecting everything in that Luma range. And yeah, it does look better. I'm not doing bad here, honestly, considering we started right here. But in here, I have true separation in each one of these masks. Look at how that auto masked the subject from the background. And not only that, in Lightroom, I'm saving these, and you can save these into presets. So you can say, hey, this is a good combination of foreground subject, right? So this, I have masks like this in my Belladonna presets. I have masks like this in Natural HDR that I've started implementing that basically puts everything in place. You just update the mask and boom, just like we saw with these skies. That's a huge advantage. The AI tools in Lightroom are more. Yes, I know I make presets, so that's relevant to me. But even if you're making your own presets, this I think is relevant to you because making formulas is huge for workflow. It's huge for getting more creativity in your imagery because by having tools and presets and styles, you can try all these things to fulfill your visualization. I always tell people using styles isn't about your images looking like mine. That's why I do mod presets so people can mix and match and do all this stuff. It's about being able to try 20 different subtle variants in 5 seconds. Because you can't do that manually and get the same amount of control and variance. Okay, let's close this off though by looking at one of the big debates that comes in for Capture One, and that is the Fuji files. So let's find a couple of different Fuji files. Here's one here. Here's Capture One. I put the street class preset on this. Here's Lightroom. I put the street class preset on this underground scene in Guanajuato. Okay, we got pretty good range. We got some dark shadow, but yeah, we got pretty good control. And I could lift, I could tweak, I could bring some more into these, and I could actually pull out a ton of detail again in this raw file. But I like having some shadow. I'm okay with that. But what this image is a good test is it's shot at ISO 2500, so it's a high ISO, it's a dark scene, and we're lifting it quite a bit in both of these. Let's lift it a little more here even as well, and just make sure we have lots of detail. Let's actually zoom in on both. I'm going to zoom in right here where we kind of have a transition around this green flag. Okay, this is Capture One. People are always saying, oh, Capture One's not wormy. Well, what they're talking about is these kind of little wormy marks here, and this is Capture One, guys, on a high ISO file. Let's look at the same in Lightroom, and again, we're like at 200% here in Lightroom. Right now as it stands, okay, I just want to be clear what I'm saying here. Listen closely. This is Capture One, Fuji X100V file. This is Lightroom. The Capture One's a little sharper, so let's bring Lightroom up to speed a little bit, and let's sharpen a little more, okay? Again, you can see there's some differences here. What we have is grain. I'm going to tell you a secret. Turn off the grain. Look at this, okay? And let's turn off grain in Capture One. Okay, now we're looking at the same. Here's the worminess people are talking about in Lightroom versus Capture One versus Lightroom. Now the Lightroom version is actually more sharp. So let's bring up our sharpening a little bit. You'll notice if we actually sharpen these close to equal, they both have artifacts from the sensor on the Fuji camera. And honestly, guys, I think the Lightroom one, yes, I see the worminess they're talking about, but there's a lot of artifacts here on the Fuji, and it's kind of editing some of them out, but you can still see bits and pieces. I don't really think the Fuji is that much more. But the secret that I'm getting at is it doesn't matter that much, because as soon as I put some grain in, it looks natural. I'm going to go silver rich and put about 30 points of grain in, okay? And now it's blending together, right? It's a little more filmic. What happens? I'm going to go down here to the grain in Lightroom. Now we're in Lightroom again. Grain. As soon as I add some grain, the so-called worminess virtually disappears. And you can say, oh, well, you're taking detail away. Well, maybe, but I'm getting a very natural feel to this. I can sharpen more if I want. I can tweak it. So I'm showing you with nothing, right? With no grain, so you can see a real comparison between these two. They both have some artifacts. It's the life. The other thing I can do in Lightroom is I could right-click, and I can enhance this, and it's going to actually do some AI enhancements. Lightroom is a lot ahead on its AI stuff. And if I look here with this, I can run this and enhance it, and let's see what happens. Okay, so you can see it's made a DNG down here, and this is the enhanced version. Now, when I pull in here, is it different? Let's look at both. This is the original, and this is the enhanced. So it's a little cleaner. Okay, you can do that if you're really worried about this. It's not perfectly clean. Remember, this is a high ISO shot, but it's a little cleaner. The reality is, I usually put a little bit of grain on my output images anyhow, because I want them to kind of have that organic, natural feel. And the moment I do that and add a little bit of grain, and you can control your settings, I have grain presets implemented in a lot of my packs, there's really very little different. The truth is, it's actually disappearing more in Lightroom when I add some grain than it is when I add some grain in Capture One. But a little grain covers a multitude of sins, blotchiness in skies, things like that. So a little grain, I've taught for years, put a little grain, it's okay. It's very filmic, it's very nice, it's good. It's not rocket science. Bottom line, let's look at a different image. Let's take a portrait. Here's a portrait shot on an X-T3. So this is a lot more of a low-key situation here. Here's a Lightroom version, and here is Capture One. Again, edited very similar using both. Okay, fine. Let's go into our details. Let's punch in. This is 200%. And we can see that this, yes, it has a little bit, and I haven't even applied grain to this. It's very clean at this low of an ISO. Let's punch in on this one. Again, they look good on both. They both have, look at this. They both have some artifacts, guys. Look at right above her head there. Back to Lightroom. You tell me, I'm not seeing much difference. And if I add a little bit of grain to this, suddenly what was worminess is just now a part of my grain structure. And I zoom out and I got a great looking image. So Lightroom, Capture One. Which do you like best? I think that's what this comes down to. Guys, I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you'll like, I hope you'll subscribe, leave a comment, let me know what you think. That's my feeling as we come into 2022 on the latest versions of Lightroom versus Capture One, but both are gonna work good for you. Let me know what you like and why, and let's see all of these companies keep competing and making better tools for our photography. We'll see you on the next one.